Well, I thought we could move past this whole debacle, but fired ArenaNet developer Jessica Price is back at it again, spouting her toxic nonsense. So if you haven't been following this whole debacle, I recommend you watch my last few videos on the matter. But basically what happened was a Guild Wars 2 player offered polite feedback, Jessica publicly berated him and implied he was being sexist before calling the Guild Wars 2 community a bunch of rando asshats, and then she was fired by ArenaNet. Since then, she's tried to play the victim, tried to shift the conversation to be about gender issues rather than her own toxic attitude, incited biased media outlets against ArenaNet in her defense, and went on numerous Twitter rants attacking ArenaNet by claiming that the company encouraged harassment, but few are actually buying into Jessica's bullshit. I'm all for people fighting for noble causes like gender equality, but what Jessica did was exploit a cause for her own selfish goals by twisting the narrative of a situation that had nothing to do with gender issue, hurting the cause more than anything. Instead of being introspective about her own actions, all she's been doing is deflecting attention away from her own malicious behavior under the guise of gender issue. Now, back in July 11th, 2018, after finishing her Twitter tirade against ArenaNet, and anyone who so much as dared to disagree with her, she said that she'd be taking a vacation and taking some time off of Twitter. The hope was that she would take some time to reflect and be willing to move past what was in large part the consequences of her own actions. But nope, it only took her a little over 2 weeks to get back on her high horse, posting the following string of tweets on July 29th, 2018, starting with this. Alright, where was I? Oh right, staring in disgust at an industry that values a handful of trolls and neo-Nazis and a bunch of bots more than their female talent. Wow, what a great start. Sure, just go right ahead and generalize and dehumanize anyone who doesn't stroke your ego by calling them trolls, neo-Nazis, and bots. I'm sure people will take you much more seriously now. Go ahead and keep making it all about everyone but yourself. Keep refusing to look at yourself in the mirror and keep instigating the same toxic behavior you keep shunning like the hypocrite you are. Jessica then proceeded to once again attack ArenaNet, stating the following. So, given that my former employer poured blood in the water to attract the sharks and then threw me in and basically did the same to game devs collectively, especially female and B1s, I'm changing how I do Twitter. Yeah, ArenaNet did nothing of the sort. They simply fired an unruly employee who unjustifiably attacked the community while very publicly representing the company, after which they assure the community that Jessica's actions weren't representative of their values. Unlike Jessica, who's quick to resort to nasty attacks, ArenaNet did so via a polite, sensible response that very clearly laid out the situation and the reasoning for why they ultimately resorted to letting Jessica go. As one of their excerpts reads, quote, "We want to hear from our players. It's not acceptable that an attempted interaction with our company, in this case a polite game suggestion, would be met with open hostility and derision from us. That sets a chilling precedent." In stark contrast, Jessica's insistence on expressing herself with such a vile attitude is making it impossible for those outside of her choir to feel any kind of sympathy for her. Jessica then proceeded by saying, quote, "I've turned off notifications for anyone I don't follow. Given that my notifications are mostly how I interact with Twitter, if I don't follow you, I'm not likely to see your responses. If you're someone I know, you can find other means to contact me. Or to put it more clearly for the trolls, have fun screaming into the void, kids." I've touched upon this before, but this highlights exactly the kind of person Jessica is. She's a one-way street personified. She wants the world to listen to what she has to say, but will not lend an ear to any feedback without taking it personally or without feeling like she's being talked down to. That's how this whole controversy began in the first place, with a member of the Guild Wars 2 community politely sharing his opinions and Jessica disregarding them with unwarranted hostility, all while happily accepting any comments that praised or agreed with her. Moving on, Jessica went back to talking about ArenaNet's alleged irresponsibility, stating, quote, "Anyway, ArenaNet's continued refusal to condemn the increase in harassment they've subjected numerous women in the industry to is pretty telling. I know that it's hard for companies to find the spine to take controversial moral stands, but you'd think, hey, stop threatening to rape and kill female devs, their families, and their pets would be, low-hanging fruit everyone could get behind. Actually, ArenaNet has said in very clear terms that they won't tolerate harassment, that when an employee feels harassed, they want the issue to be brought up so that they can protect them, so they can deal with the issue and use it to speak to the larger issue of harassment. In fact, months ago when a Twitter user made a sexist joke, ArenaNet was quick to shun the implications, defend their female employees, and highlight their achievements very publicly. Not to mention that it wasn't just Jessica who was fired, Peter Fries, a male developer, was also scrutinized under the same standards after he defended Jessica's behavior. She keeps emphasizing how she was fired for being a woman, but really it comes down to employees who attack their community without any real provocation. Jessica then continued, and my understanding is that their internal response to this has been to institute more restrictive social media policies, e.g., employees aren't allowed to complain about work at all on their personal accounts, but not to institute any additional protections for those who comply. Well, yeah, I'd imagine that after an employee of a company thought they could get away with publicly berating customers, ArenaNet clarified that you shouldn't act like an asshole while representing the company, which is basic common sense. If employees want to express their thoughts on their private, personal social media accounts, that's fine, but when you make your Twitter profile public, actively advertise yourself as an employee of a game company, discuss games you've helped develop, and then insult those who play it, yeah, it's a no-brainer that there will be consequences. Jessica then added the following. One of the larger issues here, of course, is not just their insistence that they own 100% of their employees' time and off-work lives, but the promotion of the company brand as one in which you can interact directly with devs. Once again, a complete exaggeration of the circumstances behind her firing. ArenaNet never insisted that their employees were on the clock 24/7 or that they own 100% of employees' free time and off-work lives. Jessica can have her own personal opinions, and she can be whoever she wants to be in her own time, but the second she publicly put herself out there on Twitter as an ArenaNet employee and started a discussion on narrative elements of Guild Wars 2, she was inviting feedback. She was perfectly content with accepting and responding to flattery. It's only after someone politely disagreed with her that she threw a childish, toxic tantrum. You can't have it both ways. Either you publicly invite feedback and understand that there will be those who won't always agree, or do not engage in a public forum if you can't handle being disputed. Furthermore, ArenaNet never promoted a company brand where fans can directly interact with developers. From the looks of it, the choice is up to each individual. Jessica Price could have made her Twitter profile or her comments about Guild Wars 2 private, or she could have ignored comments she felt were derogatory, and she was never expected to directly interact with the fans if she didn't want to. It was Jessica's choice to do so, and with that comes certain responsibilities, chief among them being to not belittle polite customers. The second Jessica engaged Terroir, she, of her own volition, became a customer representative, and she abused that power to accept praise while shunning amicable disagreements because apparently, in her eyes, those who work on a professional level are utterly infallible. From there, on the topic of fan communities, here's what she had to say. Video games have a fan community that's more hostile to creators than any other fan community I'm aware of, and video game companies require more direct engagement from their creative talent, with fewer protections than the rest of the entertainment industry. Or put another way, the video game industry insists that its creatives also function as customer service reps. That first bit is absolutely not true. Just take one gander at something like the Star Wars fanbase, and tell me game developers have it worse. Segments of the Star Wars community were so toxic in their backlash that they've driven some actors completely off of social media, psychologically ruined others like Jake Lloyd and Ahmed Best, who played young Anakin Skywalker and Jar Jar Binks respectively, and disillusioned George Lucas himself from his own franchise. I should also add that those afflicted by this kind of harassment were people from all walks of life, not just women. That's not to say there aren't ways women have had it worse in terms of harassment, but let's not twist the narrative of an unrelated situation to artificially push an agenda like Jessica's been doing. Anyway, point is, I'm fairly confident in saying that the verbal attacks and threats towards Star Wars cast and crew were far more vicious than what most game developers might experience. Not trying to turn this into a competition or anything, I know that regardless of scale, targeted harassment of any kind is plain and simply disgusting and unwarranted, but I also won't stand for Jessica making exaggerated claims to spread her false narrative. The fact of the matter is that anyone involved with a popular artistic medium or product can experience harassment from a toxic minority of a fan base. To say video games have it worse than any other medium is simply folly. Degrees of toxicity vary by the popularity and outreach of a franchise or product. Now, I'm sure there is truth to her claims that game developers don't have the same protections as employees of other entertainment industries, based on what I've heard at least, and that is a shame and something that hopefully changes for the better as the industry continues to grow and evolve, though the way Jessica's going about fighting for these changes isn't doing anyone any favors. I also do agree with Jessica that video game companies do require more direct engagement from the creative team. But that goes without saying, given that video games are an interactive medium. They are active experiences, whereas music, movies, books, and whatnot are passive experiences. Not to mention that direct engagement from developers is especially pivotal nowadays, with live services becoming so prominent. Games that continuously evolve with fixes, patches, and updates over a long period of time, much of them dictated by players' feedback. That's what you sign up for when you decide to involve yourself with products that center around harnessing an active community. If being deeply involved with a community isn't your cup of tea, then maybe game development is just not the right profession for you. Now, in Jessica's position, she wasn't even among those required to engage in direct interaction with fans. That responsibility mostly fell upon PR, community managers, and creative leads. Interacting directly with the community was something Jessica chose to do of her own volition. Nobody required her to respond to customer feedback. She didn't have to pick up the phone when it rang, if you will. She could have just let it kept ringing while she was off the clock or outside of her work environment. But the second she impulsively picked up the phone, she acted as a customer representative for ArenaNet. And instead of acting professionally, she lashed out without provocation. That's on her. She certainly seems perfectly fine with being a customer representative when showered with compliments, though. But now that she's being called out for her bullshit all of a sudden, being a representative is this dreadful thing. Moving on, Jessica proceeded with this string of tweets. Now, to be very clear, I think anyone who is abusive to a customer service rep is being a garbage person and needs to get smacked down hard by the company. However, there's a whole realm of not necessarily overtly abusive, but exhausting behavior that kind of comes with the territory of your job description being, whenever possible, make the individual customer happy through your interaction with them. No, part of your job description is to not act like an asshole towards customers when it's not called for. Get that through your head. I admire the fuck out of people who take that on, and I especially admire people who make a career of it. But most people, with good reason, aren't interested in doing that. And the fact that your average video game company wants and pressures its creative staff to be out there engaging directly with consumers and expects that engagement to proceed as if the creative staff or customer service reps is bullshit. And it would be bullshit even if the video game fan base weren't notoriously riddled with aggressive misogyny, racism, etc. But of course, the standards for how female and male devs are allowed to behave are different, and the treatment they receive from gamers is different. All of that, however, is just about what happens on the clock and on company-controlled social media, where even the most aggressive gamers generally know not to use slurs, issue direct threats, etc. Then you've got employees' personal accounts, and if you, as someone whose job isn't customer service, shouldn't have to perform customer service duties on company-owned media, how much more should you not have to on personal social media? TV writers don't have to do this, movie screenwriters don't have to do this, novelists don't have to do this. The only branches of entertainment where creatives seem to be expected to perform customer service duties, including off the clock, is geek media, especially games or comics. Why does she treat the notion of being a customer representative as this horrible thing? Why is building direct bridges between developers and gamers something to scoff at? I get that a few bad apples can sour this kind of connection, but when done correctly, it can pave the way for some truly meaningful interactions that benefit and inspire both sides. We have seen how CD Projekt Red staff's willingness to be open, communicative, and transparent has built a sense of trust that few other game studios have. We have seen how Cory Barlog's direct reassurances on how God of War wouldn't feature any microtransactions, or how he doesn't believe in the notion that single-player games are dying, yielded a stronger sense of trust. Granted, building such bridges does mean that if people perceive that you fucked up somehow, they'll let you know, and often very harshly. But there are many times when constructive feedback, however harsh, has culminated in a positive course correction. We all, of course, know how Destiny 2 had a very rough few months at launch, in no small part because creatives on the team seemed to pay so little regard to transparency and community feedback. It was only after the creatives became more directly involved with the fans that the game began to take a turn for the better. I'll also speak from experience that as a YouTuber, I act as both creative head of the channel and as my own customer representative. And sure, there are a few bad apples, there are days when it's not the most amazing position to be in, but at the same time, this more direct relationship with the community has allowed for some inspirational interactions. It's allowed me to become a better YouTuber and person from constructive feedback. And I would hate for some PR person to put a wall between us, or for me to live in an echo chamber. As for the bit about companies pressuring employees to directly interact with consumers, I cannot speak for every company, but ArenaNet never pressured Jessica to do anything. Again, it was Jessica who chose to make her Twitter account public and gain followers, to advertise herself as an ArenaNet employee, to engage in Guild Wars 2 discussion, to respond the way she did, and to dig her own grave through her selfish actions. Nobody forced her to do any of those things. It's also worth pointing out that some companies like EA actually discourage direct interaction between developers and gamers in many situations. With Battlefront 2, for example, after the loot box controversy, developers were apparently on lockdown from directly speaking to the community, especially after that infamous sense of pride and accomplishment Reddit response that epically backfired. So it really depends on the company and the present circumstances, but in the case of ArenaNet, they didn't seem to pressure anyone outside of the people whose job is to do so into acting as customer representatives. Jessica simply couldn't resist the impulse of berating a customer for her own pleasure. This brings us to Jessica's solution on how companies should handle developer communications with the fans, stating, quote, "And as much as I don't like it, I loved the idea initially of how much creatives and fans rubbed elbows in games. The simplest solution is for companies to eliminate direct access to creatives, except in PR-controlled interviews, chats, etc. The better solution, of course, is a lot more nuanced and requires active, continuous dialogue between management and creatives. It requires a much more paternalistic approach, nuanced discussion of what safety actually means, fluid standards of access, and so on. But that's not going to happen because it would require corporations to unclench with regard to their employees and to actually treat talent as valuable, not by offering free sodas and a foosball table, but by treating their talent as people. And it's also never going to happen because it would require management to actually learn from employees who understand things like internet harassment far better than they do. Not in listening sessions, but in actual conversations, actual listening. So given that most video game management is terrible at actual authentic relationships, the safer option is just a PR wall between fans and creatives. Now, I'm all for dialogue between management and creatives. I'm all for nuanced internal discussions between employers and employees about serious issues like internet harassment or work environment in general. And I'm all for continued mutual learning and understanding. But aside from the fact that Jessica's approach isn't mutual, again, it's a one-way street, for her to claim that the consequences of her actions was a result of her talents not being treated as valuable or her not being treated as a person is simply ridiculous. How about you, Jessica, didn't treat the customers of a company you represent like people? How about your employer decided that such behavior wasn't acceptable and had to let you go as a result? How about actions have consequences regardless of whether you're on the clock or off the clock? As for this tweet about building PR walls being the safer option, I don't disagree with her there, but safer doesn't necessarily mean better. There are plenty of examples out there of companies who have built layers of PR walls around them and have become all too infamous for it. EA, excuse me. When you're dealing with community-driven products like MMOs, shared world games, and live services, closing yourself off of direct forms of interactions can often be detrimental. That's because unlike a movie, which you consume once and it's done, video games are consumed and sustained over a long period of time, which means continuous maintenance as well as continuous interaction with customers. It's par for the course with the medium. Now, these next few tweets are pretty rich. They read, quote, And the reason I hate that isn't because I actually think engaging directly with fans is at all useful as far as creative feedback. It's not. What's useful there is actual data. Are people buying? How much fanfic, fan art is being made, etc. That's what tells you if the story's actually hitting or missing with a majority of your audience. Forum posts, tweets, etc. don't. Wow, she would really make a great fit at EA. That is such hot steaming pile of horseshit, I don't even know where to begin. Let's take a look at Destiny 2. This is a game that sold millions of copies, but because developers refuse to take community feedback seriously, it's lost a significant portion of its player base, and interest as well as Twitch viewership is at an all-time low. Want to know what finally led developers to get their shit together and stop messing with us? Feedback from forum posts, tweets, etc. If you honestly believe community feedback has absolutely no value, I don't know what the hell you were doing helping develop an MMORPG of all things in the first place. Finally, she talked about how the only reason she has been posting on Twitter about Guild Wars 2 despite her belief that Twitter feedback is useless is because she wanted to pull the curtain back on game development and offer some potentially valuable insight, claiming that other developers aren't doing the same because of social media hostility and marginalization. She's touting herself as pursuing this great cause, basically. I'm not saying that the pursuit isn't admirable, but that doesn't give you leeway to be an asshole towards people who politely express their own opinions, nor does it absolve the silly notion that anyone who doesn't make games professionally has nothing of value to offer. How ridiculous is that? Ultimately, games are made for people to play, and I guarantee you that the millions of players who have spent hundreds to thousands of hours in a game have insight that developers confined in their own little bubble simply do not, and most developers understand this. They know that we don't have to be professional programmers to perceive that something about a gameplay mechanic feels off, or that we don't have to be professional writers to know that something's lacking about a game's narrative design. The fact that Jessica honestly believes our feedback has no value simply because we don't make games for a living, that we're just supposed to listen to everything developers say and not question any of their technical or creative decisions, should tell you how detrimental she is to game development and to the gaming industry. Her mentality is, we are the professionals, we know better than you, so just shut up, listen, and swallow everything we feed you with no questions asked, because you nincompoops can't possibly help make the game better than we make it. So yeah, I mean, there's not much else I can really add to my thoughts on Jessica's latest insane tirade. While the causes she's highlighting are noble ones, what's called into question are her intentions behind invoking these causes when she's constantly basking in hyperbole, misinformation, and sophism to divert attention away from her own misgivings. What's called into question is her very nature. She gives off the sense that she's just not a very good person, expecting sympathy while selfishly refusing to offer her own. It's just impossible to have any kind of meaningful, productive conversation or discussion with people like her. Oh well, let her live in her delusional vacuum. All she's done this past month is discredit herself, become a figure few will actually take seriously, and hurt her own cause. These are just one man's perspective anyway. I'd love to hear what your take is on this situation in the comments below. With that, I would like to end this news update. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoy my content and would like to support this channel directly, consider donating on Patreon. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.